Happy New Year from Until Saturday, the Athletics College Football Podcast. I am David Ubben. 3/4 of the CFB quarterfinals are in the books. I'm joined by my guys, Chris Vannini.
What's up? Technically not over. As we're recording this, the Rose Bowl is not technically over, but it's over.
The sunset on Oregon season. It's over. It's over. And our guy, Damien Harris, who is, for the record, already apologized for his Alabama playoff takes on Twitter.
Yeah. Now, listen, people, I was ready to disband the entire SEC, but luckily Texas did not completely crap the bed. They almost did. Oh, my God.
And Ole Miss has still got to play. We're at Ole Miss
SEC is still alive.
Disaster. Anyway, we're going to break down the Fiesta Peach and Rose Bowl games here live on YouTube. Before we dig into those matchups, though, we want to start today's show just by expressing our thoughts and condolences to those affected by the attack in New Orleans. At least 15 people were killed by a terrorist when he drove into a crowd of people celebrating New Year's, including former Princeton football player Tiger Besh, brother of Jack Besh, who plays for TCU, before he himself, the terrorist, was shot and killed by police. Familiar with the Besh family, they're Louisiana natives. Spent some time with Jack last year at TCU. Really good kid, really good family, and just hope they are doing okay. And New Orleans, just in general, it's a tragedy. I covered the Sugar Bowl last year, and I spent New Year's in New Orleans last year. You know, we're sitting around across the street from kind of where all this happened last year. You know, I think I was hanging out with our colleague Sam Kahn, Mike Finger, some other guys in the Texas beat, and it's just people looking to enjoy their lives, and it's hard to see when they're not able to do that. So we just wanted to address that right off the top because the families of the victims are on our minds, and that's far more important, you know, than some of the other frivolous stuff in the sport, even though we love to celebrate a lot of that. So, again, our heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims there. It's secondary, but it should be noted that because of this, we're going early today because there's not a late game tonight. Georgia and Notre Dame has been rescheduled for 4 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. This podcast will be published first thing Thursday morning. So the Sugar Bowl should be played later today if you're listening to this in your feeds, kind of depending on when you're listening. So there's no easy way or simple way to transition off that, but there were still 3 playoff games. We want to talk about them, so let's get into the show. We finally got a good football game, guys. Texas tried their best to squash Arizona State. 5 minutes in, it looked like it was going to be a squashing, and Cam Scatterbo said no mas. Texas beats Arizona State 39-31 in double overtime. Steve Sarkisian now has taken Texas to the semifinals in back-to-back years. It's worth talking about jumping off here. Where do we feel about Steve Sarkisian's place in the sport right now as sort of his status?
Well, first off, this game was crazy, by the way.
It really was an insane game.
Yeah.
This was a top 3 playoff game of all time, probably. You put it up there with that Georgia-Oklahoma Rose Bowl.
Yes.
Probably put it up there with that Georgia-Alabama title game, the one that Alabama won.
Well, that game was not actually a good football game. Crazy ending.
Yeah.
That game actually
it was an overtime national championship, but this is right up there with the greatest we've ever seen, which is so refreshing. After the first 5 playoff games had lopsided final scores, although there was a mix of competitiveness in there. I couldn't believe this game, man. You have Texas looks like they're going to run away with the game, but they can't. Arizona State keeps getting into Texas territory and keeps stumbling and can't get points on the board. It's the fourth quarter. They're down 16 points. They rally back. Cam Scatterbo's throwing a touchdown pass. He's catching a deep ball. And suddenly Arizona State gets this game into overtime because Texas misses a field goal at the end of overtime, missing 2 field goals in the final 2 or 3 minutes. Bert Auburn did for Texas. Doinked the second one. I couldn't believe it. I was losing my mind on my couch to finally have a good game. Arizona State, it's 4th and 13. If they get a stop, they win. Texas converts to 4th and 13. They win in double overtime with an interception. Just major shout out to everybody in this game. This was an unbelievably well-played football game.
Bert Auburn better have a fruit basket sent to Quinn Ewers' house by the time they get home. I did want to, Damien. I wanted to throw some stuff by you here real quick.
Okay, let me run it by.
Quinn wasn't good today. Quinn was not good today. But that 4th and 13 that you mentioned, Chris, before the snap, he sees there. Arizona State was hot. They were coming hot. I think they brought 7 or 8 guys there. Checks to a max protect. There's some. I haven't heard this definitively. I think he checked Bolden or Golden to a post on the backside because he knew there was no safety over the top. It was a cover 0 look. Great blitz pickup from Gunnar Helm and Trey Wisner. Hits a great ball over there to win that. Did anything Quinn did today win you over, Tame? Did anything he did?
I don't want to say like he won me over because I went into the season saying Quinn Ewers was my favorite player in all of college football, saying Texas was my favorite to win the national championship. If anything, they just showed me why I believe that in the first place. Now, about when it comes to Quinn, what frustrates me about Quinn is he makes unbelievable plays like that. Like that is why Arch Manning isn't getting reps right there.
Yeah.
It's because of the leadership, it's because of the experience, and it's because of the ability to dissect the defense and make plays accordingly, not just using your athletic ability. Like the quarterback position is about using your mind and using your arm. And Quinn Ewers does that really well at times, and then at other times he just doesn't. And the offense seems like they're stuck in neutral. He seems like he's leaving the ball inside on outside throws. Some of his deep balls are just hanging in the air forever. One of them got picked off today. And that's what makes you have this love-dislike relationship with not only Quinn, but with this Texas team, because they show spurts of greatness. They show like the first, I would say, 5 minutes of this game, I was back in the mindset of, wow, this Texas team, this is who I thought they were at the beginning of the season. Defense to offense, offense to defense, good in the kicking game. Bert Auburn has been great all season long up until this moment. So it's just like there's too much of this roller coaster that Texas is riding. But giving compliments where compliments are due, Quinn Ewers made the plays in order to be made, or made the plays that needed to be made in order for them to win the game. That was because of his experience. That was because of his leadership. That might have even been because of all of the adversity that he has faced all year long. And then in the moment where it mattered the most, he delivered, he stepped up, made the throw, made the checks, set the protection, and did what a leader is supposed to do in the biggest moment of the game. So huge respect to him, huge respect to Texas for being able to pull out a win against a really tough and scrappy Arizona State team. All the credit in the world to Arizona State, but especially Sam Leavitt and Cam Skattebo, because I have said since they won the Big 12 championship that they're going to have to back up all this talk that they were doing. Sam Leavitt came into this matchup saying, okay, I'm going to prove that I'm the better quarterback than Quinn Ewers. Am I going to sit here and say that he is ultimately the better quarterback? Maybe not. Did he play like he could have been the better quarterback today? I would say yes. He made a lot of plays with his legs. He made some throws with his arms. He did a lot of good things. And then Cam Skattebo, I sat up here and talked about, man, I really wish he hadn't sat up here and said, I'm the best running back in the country. I sat here and belabored him about it. Do I think you're the best running back in the country, Cam Skattebo? No, it's still Ashton Genty, but man,
second
what
best.
a unbelievable performance from him. I mean, and believe it or not, I was ready to get on here and get on him again because, you know, the frustration, I saw the frustration building, and, you know, they did the reports about how he was on the sideline, he was throwing his helmet. You could see the frustration with his teammates. And I was like, man, like if he can just harness that and turn that into positivity and turn that into making plays and using that fire to bring guys along with him, I bet they have a chance to come back, because Texas gets hot, then they get cold, then they try to, you know, win the game at the end. And that is exactly what he did. So, you know, all the respect to everybody, like Chris said, that was a part of this game, because, you know, going into this was one of the biggest spreads that we had coming into these rounds, and it was the most exciting game that we've had by far. So major kudos to everybody involved.
This game, in a lot of ways, I think, sort of is emblematic of this title race this season, which is, especially now that we've got Oregon getting their butts kicked, the one team that hadn't lost in this field. Everybody's flawed. Texas, their running game issues came back up again today. We saw that. They couldn't wrestle control of this game because they couldn't stay on the field. We'll get to the Peach Bowl. Penn State seemingly couldn't get stopped running the ball. They refused to run the ball. But looking at this, every team in this field has got some real issues. And that's going to make, I think, for some compelling semifinals. We're going to have another pretty compelling game between Georgia and Notre Dame, on Thursday. But 53 rushing yards for Texas, 1.8 yards a carry against this team. They had some penalties. We did not really look composed in the third quarter and fourth quarter early on.
No.
When Arizona State was rallying. We saw some DBs. The ball is in the air. The DB's just like, where's the nearest receiver? I got to tackle him. Like, it was not great. But I think, to me, that's a really interesting spot for this title race, because there is no big bad Georgia. There is no big bad Bama out there. Every team that's still playing can win the title. And that is a crazy place to be now that we have, 5 teams left. And it's going to be a pretty amazing finish to the season.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the team that looks like the big bad is the team that was Ohio State, who we'll get to in a minute, and that's who Texas will play next at the Cotton Bowl in Texas. This was such a weird game. Texas's defense was on the field for like 90 something plays. Like Arizona State was like double the first downs. Texas couldn't run the ball. They were averaging like 1 yard, 2 yards per carry. And yet
I think in the third quarter, they ran 6 plays to 21 plays. And I think that caught up to them in the fourth quarter.
Yeah. And Arizona State is still down double digits. And you're just like, what is going? This is such a weird game. Outside of the punt return touchdown from Texas and the 2 plays opening drive, Texas didn't really move the ball much until a little bit at the very end of the game. So Arizona State's defense played their butts off, really kept them in this game, kept hanging around while the offense kept pounding it against the wall, getting into the red zone, not punching it in until they finally did. And to your point, Ubben, about Texas's defensive backs, I mean, that Captain Scatterbo TD throw was really fun, but it was also really underthrown. And the, and the defensive back got completely lost.
How,
the DBs couldn't find
it.
Devin.
That was the Thorpe winner, right?
That's Barron. Johnny Barron.
That's the best defensive back in the country. So it felt like Texas was panicking. It really did. And when they missed that field goal to go to overtime, you're like, wow, I can't believe this.
The second field goal in 2.5 minutes that they'd missed, by the way.
Shout out to the Arizona State ball girls for screwing my man Bert Auburn. How much did they get tipped off by Dillingham?
Here's
how
my
much
question.
Did they get tipped off?
I saw that live, and I was immediately thinking, oh, that's pretty funny. They're messing with him. But if you go back and watch the clip, I don't know why they would have to walk. There's no reason for them to do it. And you see them kind of connect eyes and see that he's lining it up. And they're like, oh, hang on. I need to go walk closer to the stands there's no reason for him to do it. I really want to know more about this.
I was watching, like me and my wife were watching on the couch. And like as soon as they started walking, I was just like, "Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Like, move! Like, get out of the way!"
I was not even drilled by.
Not even because I was like cheering for Texas versus Arizona State, or not really because I had a dog in the fight, but more so just because I was like, "You're gonna screw this guy! Like you're gonna ruin this guy's day by doing that." Like I know how serious kickers take their routine whenever they're on the sideline and they're kicking into their net and everything, and especially when you miss a field goal, like. It was bad. It was bad. It was a setup.
Let's talk about the targeting situation, because this became a gigantic thing at the end. I think people are kind of overreacting, but so
I'm ready for people to yell at me. I didn't think it was targeting.
Here's two ways. So there's two plays. Texas throws a deep ball, intercepted. Along with the interception, Isaiah Bond, the Texas receiver, is hit by another player. Head snaps back. They review it for targeting. No call. Arizona State goes down and ties the game. Then with like a minute or so left, Arizona State completes a 3rd and 15 catch, like 10 yards. And Taft makes the tackle, hits him, and they don't call targeting. They reviewed it, didn't call it targeting. Terry McCauley, the Thursday Night Football rules guy, thinks it's targeting. Kenny Dillingham didn't really want to say much afterward. But if that is called targeting, that puts Arizona State at like the 35-ish yard line.
Game's over.
No, game's definitely not over.
It's pretty much over.
Have you seen their kicking situation? It's not
very
good.
Right.
And Texas defense is good. But I don't like that excuse of we would have won the game because you were a 4th and 13 away from winning the game. Stop 4th and 13 and you win. But some people are like, oh, you don't want targeting to decide the game. Oh, we hate targeting. Don't let it do. Like, what did you think? The Texas hit, I thought it was not targeting. I thought it was just a guy moving forward. The helmet collided, but he wasn't like lowering his head to hit him. They just collided. But it is a play I feel like I've seen it flagged as targeting many times before. And that's where the frustration comes from.
I'm with Kenny Dillingham in that I don't know what targeting is. I don't know how it's officiated. I think the coaches complain it's officiated inconsistently. But me watching it live, I thought, oh, that might be targeting. They reviewed it. I'm seeing everybody on Twitter is like, oh, that's definitely targeted. That's definitely targeted. I'm like, I don't see targeting. I see his head up. I didn't see a launch. He just goes in and wraps up. Like, I can see why people thought it was targeted. But again, maybe I just don't know what targeting is. I didn't think it was targeting, but everybody else
I just appreciated the consistency in officiating. If you don't call targeting on Isaiah Bond, don't call targeting on was it Taft?
Yeah,
don't call targeting on Taft at the end of the game. Like I thought both could have gone either way. They could have called both of them targeting. They could have called them both not targeting. I thought at least the fact that with Bond's situation, it looked bad. They went to the booth, they reviewed it, they declared that it wasn't targeting, and then they followed it up at the end of the game, making the same exact call. I was just glad the officiating was consistent, because if you have one that's targeting, you have one that's not. Then you got Sark versus Kenny Dillingham. Which call was right? Which call was wrong? I just like the consistency. And especially with Taps was a little bit more like, I'm with you, Ubben. I didn't see any launch. I didn't see him, duck his head or anything like that. He was going to make a good form tackle. And it's so hard, especially for these defenders, because they're already in the act of tackling. And then you're telling them to adjust their body mid-motion just to avoid, a guy that catches and turns right into you. Well, in the way that football works, defenders are entitled to space just the way that offensive players are entitled to space. So if a guy catches the ball and turns right into you and y'all hit face to face, then I see it as no targeting. And that's how I saw that. That's how I saw that play.
I think this is a good time to tip our caps to the Sun Devils, who I think America fell in love with them today. Even in a loss, you have Cam Skattebo puking on the sidelines because he drank too much water too fast. Do you ever do that, Dame? That's a new one for me.
It's happened. It's happened.
I've never thrown up. Like, I played basketball and stuff growing up, and I've never thrown up because of like physical exercise. So I think just some people do and some people don't. I don't think that necessarily means a whole lot, but that was a weird one. Anyway, so he pukes,
by the way,
and then they get better.
Kenny Dillingham called in the post-game press conference. He said "puke and rally," which
we're gonna have puke and rally T-shirts at Sun Devil Stadium for sure next year. You have Sam Levitt. He decides he's coming back, obviously, and plays really well today. A guy that they, I don't want to say they dug him out of the scrap heap, but I don't know that people were beating down his door at Michigan State to go get him. And he turned into a star this year. He was a huge reason why they did what they did. Cam Skattebo obviously will not be back, but a guy that people love. And I think people like Kenny Dillingham. And we've been talking him up for a long time on this show, on our site. I think Kenny is really the picture of what a modern football coach kind of has to be in a million different ways, and is just really, really authentic. And I think his team can see that. His guys can feel that. And he took over such a disastrous situation. And they had a rough first year. And for him to have that team continuing to play, continuing to fight, not only just today, but this whole season, when I think we were ready to discount them as like, oh, it's a pretty nice story, like mid-season. No, they're in the playoff. They almost got to the semis. Like, it was crazy. The defense is bringing back 7 players.
And he got a new contract extension.
Signed a new 5-year contract extension. I told y'all he's not going anywhere. The defense has 7 guys back who played at least 300 snaps. He's still trying to quote unquote activate the Valley, as he's been saying since the day he got the job. It's a tough place to really get people fired up. I don't really know why in Tempe and in the Phoenix area, but if anybody's going to do it, I think Kenny's going to do it. And this is the kind of year that can launch you to it. In sort of talking to their collective too, going into the playoff, I think they told me that they've seen exponential growth in getting cash and trying to figure that out. And, that's the rules of college football right now, right? Cash rules everything around me. That's that's where we're at in the sport, man. So Cam Skattebo, people love him. Kenny, I think, between that and like going back and making people shake hands and starting his press conference with, hey, like, this is on me. I got to get our defense out of that call on 4th and 13. There's a lot of coaches, Chris, some of whom we've talked about on this show, that would not handle it in that same way. I do freeze. Anyway, there's a lot of guys that would not handle it that way, and I think they won themselves a lot of fans today.
One last Cam Skattebo note. I think obviously we need to give him even more praise, because even in a losing effort, for the first time in Peach Bowl history, he was named the offensive MVP on a losing
that's crazy,
team. And it was well more than deserved. So Cam Skattebo, major props.
I felt good about having him on my Heisman ballot too. I couldn't believe that more people didn't vote for him, and I couldn't believe that he didn't get a New York invite. But I think people saw how special he was today for people. Chris,
one guy who did, by the way, one guy who got the invite, Dylan Gabriel, did not play well. They just lost. That Rose Bowl is now final. I think 41-21 is the final score. So you come out of this day saying, hey, Cam Scatterbo should have been invited to New York.
Chris,
we both had him at number 3. He should have been.
I have a theory. I think that, not to get on my Heisman voters suck thing again, I think people didn't watch Arizona State. I think it's just that simple.
Correct. Yeah, that's all it was. That's what it usually is. Yeah.
Yeah, usually. Anyway, so yeah, I loved this game. Thank you to Arizona State for saving the college football playoff and giving us an actual good game. I think we're going to get a compelling, ugly game on Thursday afternoon night. I hope it's a great one. I don't think it will be as aesthetically pleasing as the Rose Bowl was, or certainly even as Texas and Arizona State was. And a big moment for the Big 12, sort of, even though we have sort of a fake SEC team and a fake Big 12 team. This is a Big 12, Pac-12 showdown in spirit. But, I think it matters that the Big 12 acquits itself well on the playoff, considering that the ACC sort of kind of did a little bit. And I think it's a weird spot, too, because even if the Big 12 wins this game, I don't know that like Arizona State doesn't care about Texas. Whereas if Iowa State was in this spot and beaten Texas, they might be throwing them a parade right now.
Texas, Ohio State, man. That's what's next. Ohio State, the Rose Bowl, dominating. They look freaking scary, man. Yeah. I mean, we did not think we would be going live halfway through the fourth quarter of this game. This game was over. This game was over in 3 drives. Legitimately. Ubben, what'd you think?
Yeah, let's get into the Rose Bowl. I got to tell you, I think my biggest takeaway from this is Jeremiah Smith the best true freshman since Adrian Peterson in terms of just walking into the sport? I don't think Adrian Peterson understood the position at the same level that Jeremiah Smith does. But in terms of just physical freak, and Smith knowing how to run routes, knowing how to leverage his body, creating space, when the ball's in the air, he does stuff that you watch, like Devontae Adams do on Sundays. You're this guy's this is what, how, dude? And also, you heard the hype about him going back to early in the spring, week 1 of spring. People were like, oh, Jeremiah Smith, he's the best receiver on Ohio State's roster. And you're kind of okay.
They just lost. You're like, they just lost Marvin Harrison. Let's calm down a little bit.
And people are like, no, the coaches think he might be better than Marv. And it's all right, chill out. And now, he's better than Marvin Harrison Jr. Am I crazy for saying that? I think that's I think it's clear to me.
Ubben, and I'm gonna say this on here. This is live. Y'all can at me at DHX34 on Twitter. Y'all can at me at d.soak, SOAQ on Instagram. If I had the number 1 pick today, I want Jeremiah Smith right now, number 1 pick in this year's draft at 19 years old, because he's got the physical God-given ability. He's got all the technical tools in his toolbox that Ubben just said, and he's just a straight up dog. He sent a message to the University of Oregon and said, if you cover me one-on-one, they are throwing me the football. And he looked like a man amongst boys today. He looks the part. He plays the part. A lot of times you hear the phrase, looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. No. This dude looks like Tarzan, plays like King Kong, Godzilla, all of that. This dude, I have never seen a kid. And it's so funny because we were just talking about we're having the same conversation about Ryan Williams at the beginning of the season. But now that the season is coming to a head at the end and we're seeing the cream of the crop rise, Jeremiah Smith is the best wide receiver in football. I don't care who won the Biletnikoff. I don't care who people think should be the top pick. Who is this? Who is that? Jeremiah Smith, when you talk about the receiver position, knowing how to play it, having the toolbox, having 3x size hands to just catch the football. Have you guys noticed that when the ball touches his hands, it just never moves? It's
even when he one hands it.
When he literally, I've never seen a one-handed bobble. I've never seen a two-handed bobble. This dude is him, as these young kids say.
I think the difference between him and Ryan Williams is Ryan Williams can make these crazy contested catches and obviously has probably a little more speed. But Ryan Williams is not nearly as refined, and Jeremiah Smith doesn't have to make as many contested catches because he creates more separation, and then he can just go over guys. He's elevating, and that's it's sort of a contested catch, but also the DBs might as well not even be there because he's elevating over them, and it doesn't even matter where they're.
It reminds me. Oh, go ahead.
He had more yards than Oregon as a team in the first half. He had 161 receiving yards. Oregon had 139. I gotta admit, I was wrong about something here, which was on our preview. I was like workshopping a take in real time, wondering if Oregon playing Ohio State now was actually advantageous to them, as opposed to later, because you're rested. They just played. They might be banged up. It's Pacific time zone. You got the body clocks and all this stuff. Completely wrong. That was obviously way out there. Ohio State was as dominant in this game against the number one team as they were against Kentucky in the first round. My prediction at the beginning of the year, it was up for worst take on our awards a couple weeks ago, that Ohio State would go 16-0. It's technically not true, but it might be spiritually true. 2 games with 2 games to go. They may end up winning the national championship, and it feels like they were the clear best team in the country. So not wrong, not right, but maybe just a little early.
You know who deserves a big shout out in this game is Mr. Jack Sawyer, because Ohio State, it's 34-0. It's ball game. You get the touchdown before half, and then Oregon scores again. It's 34, was it 16? 15. 34-15. And then Ohio State goes 3 and out, and you're like, I don't think this is happening, but like if it's going to happen, now's the time it's going to happen. And then Jack Sawyer sort of took over, started wrecking shop. He had 1 sack, and then he kind of forced him into another sack on 3rd down to get them the ball back. And at that point, like the drama was kind of over. I think they scored on their next drive to make it 41-15, I think, if I'm not mistaken. It was never really competitive after that. Whatever nerves there were at that point, like Jack Sawyer kind of iced that game in the 3rd quarter and made everyone's life on the sidelines, the people wearing, scarlet and gray in the stands, feel a little bit better. So shout out to Jack Sawyer, low key, kind of an MVP in this game.
Well, and remember, Sawyer's the one who we all saw after the flag planting incident losing his mind and saying they can't do and he got made fun of a lot from a lot of people for doing that. But as it turns out, he cared more than anybody else on that team. And I think he's seen that now as a clear leader on that team, and it's taking place on the field.
He strikes me as the guy, and I mean this as a compliment, as a psycho. Like the guy that you see him and you're like, oh, I'm glad he's on our side. I don't want to be lined up against that guy. Like he looks like he's going insane half the time, and then he's just that defensive end, a good spot to have that kind of dude on your team.
He's literally Cam Scattaboo on defense.
Yeah,
they had Ohio State had finished with 8 sacks, 13 TFLs, 9 pass breakups. They completely overwhelmed Oregon's offensive line. That's where they won the game.
Is there even really anything to say about Oregon? And I'm not saying that in a negative way, but I don't even think that it was necessarily Oregon played that bad. They had a bad game plan. Dan Lanning didn't necessarily have them ready to go, but that version of Ohio State is clearly the best team in the country. That's what Ryan Day and these boosters, the athletic director, all the people who what's the word?
Spent their 20 million.
All the people who were bragging about spending $20 million assembling the greatest roster that has ever been assembled. That team right there, this is the team that all Ohio State fans have been pompous about and honestly pissed off because they haven't been seeing it every single week. So I'm not even really mad at Oregon. I'm not mad at Dylan Gabriel. I'm not mad at Dan Lanning because they were on the tracks and Ohio State was the train. There was literally nothing Oregon could do on this day.
Let me ask you guys this. Is Ryan Day now fully off the hot seat?
I think among reasonable people, yes. Among the Ohio State diehards, not until he beats Michigan next year.
Yeah.
Which we assumed was going to happen last year because Michigan, we knew they were going to be going into a full reboot. People thought, 8-9 wins at most. They didn't even end up getting that, although Alabama helped them get to 7. It just
8.
seems like that until he gets over that hurdle, there's going to be a low level, grumbling, a simmering in the pot that, again, weirdly enough, I think even a national championship will not make go away because you Big Ten people are freaking weird.
I'm not ready to say he's fully off, but now that we see Ohio State playing at its full potential, it feels different because we said all season long, even when they were winning, Ohio State didn't feel like they were hitting that next level that we all knew that they had. They were not taking advantage of this ridiculous, talented, experienced roster that they have. And for whatever reason, the Michigan loss woke them up. The play calls are fantastic. The pass rush is fantastic. Holes are opening up. Will Howard's making electric throws. Jeremiah Smith is being targeted. They're doing everything right. They're doing everything that we thought Ohio State was going to do all year, and they really didn't, and they especially didn't against Michigan. This is one of the most dramatic turnarounds I've ever seen from like one game to another game to another game. Like that team that played against Michigan and this team now, they feel like two completely different teams, and that is wild.
6 yards a carry. That was kind of their biggest issue, was running the ball consistently. That's why they struggle to blow people out as the offensive line. They have been hampered by injuries, but they weren't great to start with. Do we want to sort of put a pin in Oregon's season and sort of hit them? Because what a weird year for them and a weird run for Dan Lanning, who has built this juggernaut out west and has had, I mean, I think a lot of people thought they might have been the best team in the country-ish, close to it.
They were. They were the clear number one.
They were.
No, I'm talking about last season and this season.
Oh.
I mean, Michigan was Michigan, but like Oregon was a national title contender. They didn't make the playoff. They lose to Washington twice in games that a lot of people thought they were the better team in both of those. And then this year they get to the playoff undefeated and don't get it done here. And it's weird because, listen, winning all your games is hard. Getting to this point, getting the number one seed, there's a reason why nobody else is undefeated. It's hard to do.
They beat Ohio State already.
Yes, they did beat Ohio State. But in the same breath, like these teams that get to this undefeated, like Michigan at a lot of points at the last the 2 years that they got to the playoff and won the championship, like they looked terrifying a lot. Obviously, the Georgia teams that won the title looked like crazy scary. Oregon, like, they just kind of kept on winning, and they were like, yeah, they look pretty good. Like, this was pretty impressive. But Oregon did not have one performance this year that was as terrifying as the last two games that Ohio State has played. And that is kind of a weird way to look at a season. Like, they're 13-1? They're going to finish. And, like, I don't know that people are going to remember this Oregon team as that much. It's a weird team and a weird year. But that's going to be the reality in the 12-team playoff.
Well, and in a larger conference, because like we said, from that Ohio State game to the Big Ten championship game, we didn't really pay attention to them because there was like no need to, because they didn't play many big games because the Big Ten is 18 freaking teams now, other than that Wisconsin game where they were losing in the fourth quarter and had to come back and win. We just didn't pay attention to them. And still think they were good, but we knew that they were never on the level of the Georgias and the Alabamas of old. And so what are you going to remember? You're going to remember that Oregon came into the Big Ten and won it for the first year. But this is how we're going to have to try to think about how we remember a lot of these teams in a 12-team playoff era. And let's wrap up on this. The whole argument, it's not fair that Oregon had to play this game against Ohio State. Do you put much into that? I'm of the belief of like, look, you're going to have to play good teams in the playoff. Like, it's not that big of a deal.
Well,
agreed.
You can't design a postseason that protects your number one seed if the most talented team in the country loses a dumb game at the end and falls.
That's why the postseason matters, though.
And like you can't make the argument that Ohio State was misseeded. Like, no, they weren't. Ohio State was seeded exactly where they were, but like there's not a lot of teams that have as much talent as Ohio State has that take a dump on themselves to close the regular season and cost themselves a bye, probably a Big Ten title, snapping. There's a reason why that loss was so horrific. And it seems right now that they're so motivated to erase that, which you're never going to fully erase it. Like, there's a bunch of guys at Ohio State that are not going to have any gold pants. And I think that, having a national title ring might help soften that blow a little bit if you're like a reasonable person, not a diehard Ohio State fan. But I don't know. I like this Ohio State team is such an anomaly that, like, yes, obviously Oregon had a tough path. Yes, obviously this is rough for them. But like Ohio State is such an outlier. Like you'd have to go back and look at these playoffs. Like it wasn't a conference title game loser that got way underseeded. Like Ohio State did this to themselves and then just snapped back into being a crazy, freakish team. So I don't know.
My only thing is, does any of this matter? Because if you're the best team in the country, don't you want to play against the best? Don't you want to compete against the best? Don't you want to play the best team and get them out of the way first? I mean, obviously that's what Oregon would have liked to do. I mean, they just got steamrolled. But if I'm Dan Lanning, if I'm Oregon, if I'm Dylan Gabriel, especially a guy who got invited to New York, didn't win the Heisman, I want the toughest challenge as soon as I can get it to go ahead and prove to people, kind of like how we're talking about, oh, well, Cam Scadaboo should have been in New York instead of Dylan Gabriel. Well, no, this is why I was in New York. This is why we're the number 1 ranked team in the country. This is why we're undefeated, because we beat the teams that are in front of us, whether they are good or they're bad. And if we can have it our way, we're going to pick the good ones first because we want to get them out here. We already beat Ohio State once. Why are we afraid to play them again? That's why I'm just like, all this conversation about paths and roads. Like at first it was, oh, well, there's 12 teams. How do you get in? We're talking about regular season. We're talking about conference championships. Now we're talking about the road, the path for what seed isn't fair. It's like, listen, if you get in, you're going to have to play another team that's one of the best 12, well, seen as one of the best 12 teams in the country. You're going to have to face them at some point if you keep advancing, if you keep winning. So just win. Just whoever is in front of you, whoever's on the schedule, focus on them and win. Like, it's very simple.
My only counter to that is in the expanded playoff, like playoff wins are going to be a stat. They're going to become a thing. And right now, Dan Lanning has none of them. Like he never made the 4-team playoff. He doesn't have one. And when you're like a guy like James Franklin, okay, is Oregon better than Penn State? I think obviously we saw that in the Big Ten title game. Penn State's got 2 playoff wins, and the vibes in Happy Valley are, quite happy at the moment. And the vibes in Oregon are very different, and part of that is the road. And so, like you're going to have to go through great teams. You're going to have to play great teams, and you want to win a title. But I think for Oregon, even being undefeated, when you have a young coach, when you have a program that's still kind of ascending, you're still building, you want to win playoff games. And they didn't get that done this year. And so that's going to be a thing.
So are we backing off of the conversation? Because I started to have a conversation with some people about, depending on how far Dan Lanning takes Oregon, does he become the greatest Oregon head coach of all time? Obviously, we know Chip Kelly, he won a national championship. He played a national championship. He took the team there. Like, how do we compare Dan Lanning? Are we taking away from him because he didn't get another playoff win? Are we still kind of seeing him as the same young, up and coming, one of the top 2 or 3 coaches in the college football world, or does this knock his resume a little bit?
I think it's still early.
It knocks the resume. I mean, it's the big game thing. It's the big. He hasn't won many of the big games. He did beat Ohio State earlier in the year, but then you lose big time in the rematch. You lost twice to Washington last year.
The Washington ones are the bad ones.
You lost to Georgia in your first game, which was admittedly a really tough game, but that is part of the conversation around Lanning. He's still one of the best coaches in the sport, but it's got to be tough you go through a year and you don't even get a playoff win on your thing. But back to the seeding point, because there's going to be a discussion at the national championship game when all the commissioners get together for their annual CFP meeting. You need unanimous votes to change things for 2025. Do you change the automatic buys, or do you change how the seeding works? And I think the way this first round and second round has played off so far is that it's a lot more difficult than people think. Oh, just reseed. Oh, just don't give the first round buys to the conference champions. We know who the most competitive losers have been. It's 12 seed Clemson, who stole a bid. It's Arizona State, who was Big 12 champ, ranked behind Alabama. And
nobody
Boise
respected.
It's Boise State, the group of 5 team, who we're still going to play. So this idea of like, oh, it's not fair, just do this, as if that's going to fix anything, is not accurate at all. And you're then going to hurt the value of the regular season, which is something I keep harping on, and Ubben and I keep going back and forth on. But like this idea of like, oh, this playoff round is ridiculous, we should change it. Like you're not going to find a perfect solution. The NFL is about to have a 14-win NFC North team play on the road for the playoffs because they didn't win the NFC North. That's why that Lions-Vikings game this coming week is so important, because the regular season still has to matter. And I really think people are like, oh, just reseed, or oh, just change this, or oh, take rid of the buys. There are going to be consequences to those changes that people aren't talking about.
Let's peek ahead to the Cotton Bowl briefly before we talk about the Fiesta Bowl. Last year, Texas fell victim to, I saw it in person, the greatest quarterback single game performance I've ever seen. Michael Penix, chucking it all over the yard to Roma Dunze, Jalen Polk. Who am I forgetting? Apologies, because
Roma Dunze.
No, Roma Dunze and Jalen Polk, the third.
Remembering all
McMillan.
these guys is hard.
Jalen McMillan is the other one that I'm forgetting. I feel bad because he was on my fantasy team for like 3 weeks, but I cut him because he wasn't getting it done. Anyway.
You're the worst.
Now you've got, let's just say Will Howard is no Michael Penix, but this receiver group with Egbuka and Tate and obviously Jeremiah Smith, probably close to that level, maybe not in totality of those Washington guys. But it's going to be a huge test for Texas secondary. And I'm guessing, not as a tape study, but as a motivational tactic, I think they're going to be watching some of that Sugar Bowl film from last year, from that in that defensive back room, to remember it wasn't like they were played that bad. They didn't play great. I mean, they just got torched, but they're going to be going up against an incredible test. And it's going to be really fun to watch down there in Texas. Chris, you'll be there. We'll see who else is there for us. But what jumps out to you guys about this matchup before we move on to the Fiesta Bowl?
First thing, I saw early line from somebody, I think was Texas -2, which I couldn't believe. That is definitely got to change. Ohio State is going to be favored. Ohio State is going to be favored coming in this game. Texas has put forward 2 of the worst performances among winning teams in the playoffs so far. I look at simply Jeremiah Smith versus Jahdae Barron in that Texas defensive backfield, which is really good. That'll be a really fun matchup. But Sam Leavitt was having some success throwing the ball at times. And then can Texas run the ball? They ran the ball well against Clemson. They couldn't run the ball against Arizona State. And if you can't run the ball and you're putting it all on Quinn Ewers, that's going to be trouble. Yes, Quinn Ewers has made some really good plays, but he doesn't seem like he's in a position where he can win you a game. So can Texas run the ball? And can Jeremiah Smith get open? That's what I want to see.
Yeah, well, I want to see if Texas can block this Ohio State front. I mean, obviously led by Jack Sawyer. We saw the pressure that they got on Dylan Gabriel today, and it makes me nervous. I mean, we've seen Banks, the starting left tackle, unanimous All-American. He's been dealing with an ankle injury all season long. He went down today. Again, their starting right tackle wasn't even playing. So their reserve tackle, who would have went in for Banks, he was already playing right tackle. So they had to scrape the bottom of the barrel to go get another left tackle. And then, you think about Quinn's limited mobility like that. And that's ankle or not. That's oblique or not. Quinn is not a mobile quarterback. He's not going to beat you with his legs. How is he going to avoid this rush? How is he going to create time? And what really concerns me, and this has been something that I've studied with Texas offense all season long, something I can't understand, is why does Steve Sarkisian make Quinn Ewers turn his back to the defense so much? I know they love play action pass. I know they want to emphasize having a good run game and they want to be two-dimensional. But when you have a quarterback who is limited mobility-wise naturally, then he's coming off an ankle injury and you're telling him to turn his back to the defense against an Ohio State rush that is purely phenomenal, that is savage, that does not stop until they get pressure on the quarterback. That just seems like a recipe for disaster to me. So the matchup is going to be this defensive line of Ohio State, Quinn Ewers. How is he going to be able to navigate the pocket? How is he going to be able to set protections to protect himself? How is he going to call audibles and hot routes? Sort of similar, not sort of, but how he did today on that 4th and 13 play to Golden to send it to overtime. Like, how is he going to be able to do that? Which matchup, which trench battle, or which side of the trenches is going to win? I think that's going to be a big determining factor in this game.
Also, quick correction, by the way, per our great friends at BetMGM, they have Ohio State favored by 6.5. That feels right. That over under like 54.5.
Now, Chris, I want to ask you, because like you said, this Jeremiah Smith, Jahdae Barron matchup should feed families. But if you're Texas, do you just say screw it and just play zone? Do you primarily sit back and not let Jeremiah Smith take the top off the defense, make Will Howard make the correct throw at the right time every single time, make the run game be a factor, make these backs get into play? Because today, like, without anybody else on the field, Ohio State could have won with just Will Howard and Jeremiah Smith. Like, let's be honest. But if I'm Texas, I don't want to let that happen. How do you see that, Chris?
I think it depends how much pressure you can get with the defensive line as well, because Will Howard is making all of those throws right now. Those ones that we didn't think he could make, he can make it. But can this defensive line, which I think is better than Oregon's, better than most teams, but probably on par with Michigan, which caused a lot of problems. If you can stop the run with 4, if you can get pressure with 4, I think that's obviously going to change what you do on the back end. But it's tough, man. It's not, I mean, they got Jeremiah Smith, they got a Bukwe. Like, they have so many weapons here. It's like, it's tough. It's tough, but we know, the best way to stop it is to get pressure on the quarterback. That's where it starts.
Yeah, true.
All right, let's go out to the desert. Penn State, those plucky upstarts, the 6th seed, beats the number 3 seed Boise State, 31-14. No Abdul Carter for like most of the game. I think in the first quarter he went out, was in the tent, had a brace.
Does
on
not
his
sound
arm.
great, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I
didn't see what they said. Yeah, it didn't sound like. I mean, I think there's a pretty good shot that they do not have him in the next round. We'll see.
Yeah, Franklin on game day, he was like, if he can go, he's gonna go. Which didn't sound.
That's how I. That's what I.
It don't sound like he's going.
That's what I say to myself every time when I wake up in the morning. If he can go, he's gonna go. Ashton Genty, 104 yards. Boise State, they tried to make it happen. Like, all right. You
go first.
All
you go first. I'll respond. You go first.
There's too much of the chatter from the folks who don't understand football. Like Genty being put.
They're called casuals. Casuals.
Yes. I don't want to be that guy, but like, if you watched last night and your takeaway was like, "Oh, Genty, they had to give him so many carries just to get over 100 yards," like. It's a line issue. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Penn State's really good up front. Genty made the most of everything that he could get. He played fine. He played really, really well. Had a lot more yards than a lot of other backs could have. And, he's been running up against 8 and 9 man boxes a ton this year. And Penn State's is just different. And Boise State held up okay on the lines, but there wasn't going to be a lot of space for him. But they stayed.
Here's some numbers to help you. But
as a running back, I can tell you it didn't look okay.
Here are some numbers. 15 missed tackles he created. 70 of those 104 yards came after contact. He did the best he could. There was not much help out there. But
if he goes somewhere,
every time he had like a moment of space, you could still like feel it. It felt like he felt special. And Penn State knew, he's like, we got to get 2-3 bodies on that guy every time, and they did.
If he goes somewhere next year where like it's a wide open offense and he can get some touches where there's not 8 guys grabbing at his legs, oh my gosh! Like people, if you think people love Genty now, like he's gonna be crazy.
Just imagine him playing. Like imagine if Boise State had just 2 guys outside of Ashton Genty that talent-wise, skill-wise matched up against Penn State and like actually made you respect them. Because Max Madsen, he played really well. He had a couple turnovers, but I mean, you could tell he played his heart out. He made some really big-time plays. He did what was asked of him. There's no receivers that are jumping off the screen like, okay, well, yeah, Ashton Genty's really great, but we can't let this guy beat us down the field. We can't let him stretch the field vertically. They're just like, we don't care if you throw it to anybody. We don't care who has the ball aside from Ashton Genty. And when you're playing a team that's as good as Penn State, especially defensively, like you're going to get the result that you got last night. Ashton Genty, the best running back in America, grinded out 104 yards against literally going 1-on-11. It felt like a lot of times.
And go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't mean any disrespect to Boise State's offensive linemen. I don't mean any disrespect to the rest of their team. But the rest of their team was not on the level that Ashton Genty was. We could see that all season long. But then it comes to a head whenever they're playing a team that's actually really, really good. So the narrative is not, oh, well, look at Ashton Genty versus a really good team. It's like, well, where is the rest of Ashton Genty's help? Where are the guys that are blocking for? Hell, even the first third down of the game, it was like 3rd and 6. They're throwing a swing screen. The first receiver doesn't even block the corner. Corner hits Ashton Genty in the backfield. Looks like it's going to be a loss of 3. Of course, he breaks the tackle and breaks 2 or 3 more. And when it should have been a loss of 2, it ends up being a gain of like 4. But it's just like, if we just had one guy, I'm playing on the team. If Boise State just had one guy that could block one guy, like that's all it takes. That's all Ashton Genty needs sometimes is for you to cover up that one extra guy. And then he can take on 6 or 7 and take it to the house. But
I will say shout out to Dirk. We'll get to the comment in a second. Shout out to Dirk Ketter because on that touchdown play, I think they had just a straight up I formation. They motioned Genty out to the left, and 3 defenders go with him. They give it to the fullback up the middle for a fullback dive for like 6 yards for a touchdown. It was awesome. We got a comment from Kevin Wise who said, is this always going to be an issue with the G5 teams? It seems like they really need beefier people on the line to actually succeed in the playoffs.
True.
The short answer to that question is yes. It's going to, and we've been talking about this all season. this G5 is not the G5 that we've seen in previous years. There is no Houston with Ed Oliver. There is no Cincinnati. There is no, UCF. These teams that really did pretty well on the lines and could push people around. Like you go back to that Cincinnati game when they beat Notre Dame. I mean, they went toe to toe with Notre Dame on the line of scrimmage.
A lot of NFL dudes on that team. NFL dudes.
Yeah, Kobe Bryant,
and Boise's got a couple. It's just harder to keep those guys. And to Kevin's point, if you've got a really good offensive lineman in the G5, it's hard to keep that guy. It just is. Yeah. But that also is a credit to Boise State. They were going to make this playoff field whether or not they got an automatic bid. They were a top 10 team. That was deserved. They really pushed back on that narrative that the G5 has done, which is why it was so important that they had such a good first season. And we'll get to Penn State here, by the way. We will give Penn State their flowers, who did win this game, actually, and are the ones going to the semifinals.
But I think it goes back to, Liberty getting the bid last year over SMU. Like, I think if SMU goes up against Oregon last year, yeah, I think if SMU gets that bid last year and plays Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl, I think that game plays out very differently, whereas Liberty just got beat up.
Yeah, but I will say, last thing on Boise State for me on this game was a lot closer than the final score indicates.
Yes.
And a lot of people were like, oh, it's another blowout. It was not another blowout. Yes, Penn State went up 14-0 right off the bat, and we're all thinking, oh, God, here we go again. Another annoying night on Twitter where we get in fights with everybody. But it turned out Boise actually rallied pretty well, played their butts off on defense, blitzed all night, like it's Remember the Titans, and was able to force enough negative plays to stick around in this game. And if Boise State makes a 38-yard field goal, that's a 7-point game with 9 minutes left. Boise State misses 2 field goals from their kicker, Jonah Dalmas, who has the 3rd most field goals in NCAA history. Like, just some really bad mistakes on their part kept it from being competitive. They have the touchdown. They could make it 24-21 in the 4th quarter, but there's a hands to the face penalty. Negates that, leads to the interception, and Boise State never got closer again. This was a fun game, a competitive game, well into the 4th quarter, and Boise State acquitted themselves well. They deserved to be in that field. It was not like the Indiana performance or the SMU performance. They were in that game for most of the game. They deserve credit for that.
On the other side of the ball, Dame, in my head, you watching this game is you throwing your phone against the wall, screaming at the screen. Why Penn State did not just run Nick Singleton and Katron Allen off tackle over and over and over and over again. I have no idea. It felt like they were getting like 10 yards a carry. And I was like, well,
they were.
They
essentially were.
Pass. We gotta do. What was the game plan? That was insane.
Listen, if I'm Andy Kodal-Nicky, like obviously this is hindsight, you won the game. But moving props like Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, Tyler Warren. That's it. That's literally it. Like Katron Allen averaged 8.7 yards per carry. Nick Singleton, 7.7 yards per carry. Tyler Warren played phenomenal. I mean, I felt like I haven't seen that Tyler Warren in a few weeks, and it was good to see him back. Drew Aller, he played well. He made the throws that he needed to. Essentially, what I saw from this Penn State team was the superstars played superstar ball. The running backs ran the ball well. The offensive line blocked well. Drew Aller, like I said, he made the right throws when they needed to be made. As a whole, maybe not so much, but he had 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. And again, Tyler Warren had 2 touchdowns, 2 great catches, contested catch. Well, one was a great contested catch. One, he ran away from a safety, which was equally impressive at a 260-pound tight end. But, the guys for Penn State, they were better than most of the guys on Boise State, and they played that way. Whenever their numbers were called, the big players made the big plays. And it was more in spurts, not necessarily the entire game, because again, it was a little bit of the play calling. Sometimes they got off schedule with running the ball. Sometimes Drew Aller didn't make the perfect throw, but at the end of the day, they made the plays that they needed to in order to win. But again, I'm not like, although we are giving Penn State their flowers, I'm not going to give them too many, because this is exactly what Penn State does. They beat the teams that they're supposed to and the teams that they have more talent than.
I think it was frustrating because it was clear very early on they were a lot better team.
They were so much better. They
gave away a ton of points in this game. It should have been like a 41-10 game. And I think it was closer in part because of this inexplicable game plan that, like, listen, we've been knocking Penn State the last couple of years until they hired Andy Kodal-Nicky for being kind of dry and kind of boring. Go back to that against Boise State. You didn't need a lot of this song and dance and the motions and the deep balls and like just run between the tackles.
There was one. There was a one. It was a third down, and Aller, it might have been an RPO. I think.
It was third and one. It was a third and one at like their own 40.
They throw it and they incomplete, and then they punt. And I'm like, what are you doing? I want to reach through my screen and just like shake Andy Kotelnicki. You sometimes like rooting for the underdog watching the game, but you're like, what are you doing, man?
Well, do you guys think that any of that had to do with the fact that Penn State knew that they were that much better than Boise State? And if they're going to beat, whether it's Notre Dame or Georgia, they're not just going to be able to run the ball for 8 or 9 yards per carry. Do you think that in a game, in a live bullet situation, they were just kind of testing some things out, looking ahead, maybe just a little bit, thinking they had the game in hand, or do you think they were just BSing?
I don't know. I think they just wanted to have balance that they didn't need. I don't know.
Based on my Twitter replies, this has been happening all year and happened at Kansas when Andy Kotelnicki was there too. A lot of people were like,
all right, well, case closed.
Apparently, I didn't see a ton of Penn State this year, but apparently this happens a lot. But also, Drew Aller, he's been okay, but not great in either of these games. And you see the flashes, that first touchdown pass, that second touchdown pass. You're like, ooh, that's an NFL guy. That's the guy who Dane Brugler, the Athletics NFL draft expert, is saying GMs are watching and thinking if Drew Aller has a great playoff, maybe he will actually go pro, despite saying he was going to come back. And you can see it in bursts. You're like, ooh, that's an NFL. But then you'll see one where it's a third down and he misses a wide open Tyler Warren. And you're just like, how? It's so inconsistent with him. But if you get a good night from Drew Aller, if Abdul Carter can play and you just run the ball when you should run the ball, this Penn State team can win it all. Everybody who's left in the field has flaws. And as much as Penn State did some things that were frustrating or didn't look as impressive as they could have, they're in the semifinals now. And they've got a team that can win the national championship. And I think if you're Penn State, you got to feel good about that you haven't even played your best game. And here you are.
The bad news for that take, Chris, is they may still have to play Ohio State in the field. And, as Michigan is to Ryan Day is to Penn State and James Franklin. So I don't like their chances there. But there's still more football to talk about. We're going to be back on Thursday night on YouTube after the Sugar Bowl to talk about Notre Dame and Georgia. I think that one is going to be just a slobber knocker in a phone booth. We'll see how that one goes. Thank you guys for listening. Please consider subscribing to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, wherever you listen to the podcast, and leave us a review. We'd love to know your thoughts about the show. Check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@UntilSaturday and call the Until Saturday phone line and leave us a voicemail. That number is 316-462-9852. That is 316-462-9852. Save it in your phone. When you get angry, dial us up. And check out the Until Saturday newsletter as well. Jana Bardall does that for us. She does a great job with it. It gives you a taste of all the things that our college football team does at The Athletic. So you can find the links to the newsletter, the YouTube channel, everything in the show's description. We will be, again, live on YouTube after the Sugar Bowl between Georgia and Notre Dame. That'll probably be around 7. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you get a notification when we go live, or follow us on social media. We'll let you know as well. So thank you for Damien Harris and Chris Vannini. I am David Ubben. Even if maybe you sit out the second half, make sure that you bring back the turnover chain, and we will talk to you again after Georgia and Notre Dame. See y'all.